Okay, let's do this thing. Ooh. Yes, I was eating ice cream. Who cares? Anyways. Hello, everyone. I'm back to actually have notes again. We've been doing a lot of these videos with notes recently. I think I deserve just like a round of applause. Because me writing notes is a revolutionary thing. And I think they make the videos better. Probably. Anyways, I'm here talking about a movie or a documentary called We Are the Guardians. This movie, or documentary, is like, it's imagine if there was like a Tomb Raider suspense thriller, but real life. That was pretty much this movie. Documentary, film, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to be honest with you, this has to be one of the most fascinating documentaries I've ever seen. Which I actually feel like I've said a lot, because apparently documentaries are a lot more fascinating than I thought. So shout out to Hot Docs, because up until this week, where I've watched, 7 or 8 documentaries, I didn't realize how awesome documentaries actually were. Anyways. I'm going to be honest with you again, okay? Because I believe in honesty. So I'm going to be honest with you. Honesty. I went into this documentary kind of, low expectations, I can say. And because, it's a documentary about saving the Amazon rainforest. It's going to be fine. It'll probably be a little preachy. And it'll be, relatively quick and wrapped up and all that fun stuff. So that's what I went in expecting. I'm going to tell you something, though. I was pleasantly surprised. Because, despite the fact that I think it did run like 15 minutes too long, this was not the typical preachy documentary I expected it to be. Which makes it seem like living... Like the typical documentary, which makes it seem like kind of living in modern society is like a terrible thing. And it's like, oh, do you breathe? You're a bad person. That kind of like preachy kind of documentary meant to create guilt and nothing else. That's what I expected. Because that's typically, I think, what you get with these kind of documentaries. But this wasn't that. This gave you all the perspectives of these issues, right? It said, look, you can't really pin this on one specific person. Like, you can't really blame the deforestation of the Amazon to this one guy cutting down trees to make a living. You can't do that. That's just irrational. He's trying to make a living, and yeah, you're right. But it's the greater system that's causing this. But you can't blame it on one person, right? You can't blame it on one farmer who just, lives on a farm. Like, you can't blame individuals, right? You can't say, well, these people are criminals. Like, you can try to teach them, but at the end of the day, the system's the bigger problem, and I think that's something this documentary does advocate and emphasize, which I think which is good, because again, I think you lose people if you try to be like, yeah, to some extent, you need to be preachy, but I think there's also a balance to be had. So the other part of this, obviously, are the guardians of the forest themselves, right? And I think they're a very fascinating group here, because again, you do have that vigilante-esque vibe, right? That kind of Tomb Raider-y vibe, that Robin Hood kind of vibe, along with kind of the suspense thriller elements. Which, if you're gonna put if you're gonna be able to make a documentary with those elements, and it's a real thing, you've done your job. Now, the one thing I do have to say, I think that the documentary went about 15 minutes too long. But, that being said, I think the other part of this is that it did such a good job kind of doing a whole bunch of these different things, right? Because on one hand, it showed these different perspectives. On the other hand, it showed kind of the Guardians and what they do. I kind of wish they did a little bit more with that than they ended up doing, actually, which is kind of ironic that my criticism is that it was too long. I think the length should have been, if it was going to be that long, I think they should have done a little bit more with the Guardians doing what they were doing. But regardless, the other thing they did was they did a lot of putting it in context for the audience, right? And saying, look, to one person, it may just be cutting down a tree, but let's look at it and let's see what happens, right? And they tried to put it in this macro context, these kind of micro actions in this macro context, which I thought was something which is, again, was a very fascinating thing to do, which is, at least, again, not the biggest documentary watcher, but at least from my own, what I understand is that's kind of the typical thing to do, right? Is to say, look, this micro thing is bad, stop doing this micro thing. But they didn't do that. Instead, what they did was they looked at it in the macro context, which was, and they said, look at this micro thing in the macro context so people understood why what these people are doing is wrong, right? Or why it hurts the environment or whatever the case may be. And again, I do still think, maybe it wasn't too long, but it definitely was, I think that maybe the time, spent on certain things could have been changed. Maybe they spent a little bit too long trying to do that kind of micro thing. Maybe they spent a little bit too long in the political context, right? There's just a bunch of different things they did, which are maybe you took 5 minutes off of this and 5 minutes off of that, and you put that time into this aspect, then maybe the rearranging of kind of the amount of time spent on each area of being, I guess, or of this kind of situation. But again, I think what it did was still necessary at the end of the day, and I think it was something which, again, and I think something this documentary had which, I'd probably say is kind of in the area of half the documentary to see, which is there was no humor in this at all. Right? And again, I understand the subject matter, but that was just an interesting thing I think I wanted to point out was this, because there were some, more difficult subject matter documentaries which still had humor and kind of life in them. And I think this one had life, but in a more serious way. So I think that's something which absolutely should be, to also taken into account with this documentary. But again, I think it was great. I was, at the end of the day, I was impressed with this because I did not expect anything from this, and it was amazing, comparative to expectations, and I think it did some unique stuff, and I think, again, I bought in on this, so, it wasn't preachy or anything. I would honestly recommend it. Again, it's playing at Hot Docs. Don't know when it's streaming, but that's all for now. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share your thoughts. Follow us on social media at comicboys_ on Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff. And you can also check us out on all the podcast apps. If you're listening to us on a podcast app, then leave a rating and review. If you're on YouTube, leave a like and a comment. And if you've seen the documentary, put in the comments kind of what you thought about it. And if you haven't, then go watch it. Because even if you don't because again, it's not a preachy documentary, so I think it's something worthwhile. And also you can follow me on social media at CollegeMall03 on Instagram and all that fun stuff. Yeah. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all next time. Soon. Bye.